Had this sitting around for a while, so might as well. Released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis and also for the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy, the Game Gear, and then subsequently included in various Namco compilations. Pac-Attack is one of those puzzle game things where you have stuff falling from the sky, and you have to position this stuff in ways that will form lines to make that stuff disappear. Because there's gravity involved, nothing gets stuck in the air, as it were, so if there's some stuff over a hole, that stuff will fall down the hole and into the bottom. Now, if that's all there was to it, it'd be a pretty simplistic Tetris knockoff, almost Tetris for beginners as it were. But because this is called Pac-Attack and not stuff falling from the sky attack, there needs to be some added twist to make it Pac-Man-y or something. So you have stuff falling from the skies and it always comes in 3 segments. Sometimes you have ghosts included in that stuff, and ghosts are bad because they prevent you from clearing away stuff. So every so often you have a piece with Pac-Man, and when Pac-Man lands, he'll go down in whatever direction he's facing, chomping ghosts along the way, and clearing the way for stuff to fill the void left by the ghosts. With the proper strategy and mindset, you could actually set off a nice little chain reaction and score some big points. Assuming you care for big points, because that used to be a thing back in the day. Each time you clear ghosts, your star meter thing will fill up. Once your star meter is full and glowing, a fairy will eventually show up, and wherever she lands, she'll cast a spell that will clear away any ghosts below her, which will cause many blocks of stuff to fill the holes and maybe clear multiple lines for big points. Like any puzzle game of this ilk, you keep playing until you eventually top out and the game ends. And if you achieve a high enough score, you get to add your name to the high score list, which also used to be a... never mind. Pac-Attack comprises 3 modes of play. The normal mode, which is the standard rules of play, there's the versus mode, which is the 2-player mode, and then there's puzzle mode, where you have to clear all the ghosts from the board using a set number of Pac-Man. Clearing the board means you get to move on to the next board, but if you run out of Pac-Man or if you top out, the game ends, but at least you could retry the current board if you mess up. Now, I will admit up front that I was not initially that big a fan of Pac-Attack. I thought the added Pac elements felt like a bit of a superfluous addition for the sake of having them in there to justify associating this puzzle game with Pac-Man. However, as I got to play more of the game over time and played with these various conversions and variations of Pac-Attack, it did start to grow on me, and while it won't be replacing Tetris or Panel de Pon as my go-to puzzlers in the John, it's a game that I could sit down every once in a while and get some mild enjoyment out of. After all, just because it's out of the norm for what you expect from a game featuring Pac-Man doesn't make it completely worthless. Unless it's Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures. That game's a sour note no matter how people try to justify it, but I digress. Control is fairly basic. D-pad moves your piece, A button rotates, that's it. In puzzle mode, you have an added ability with a B button that can switch which direction Pac-Man's facing, which is a vital component for solving them puzzles. One could wish for such an ability in the normal mode, but then that takes away a bit of the challenge, and Pac-Attack has its share of challenge, offering 4 levels of difficulty and a system where the game will speed up or speed down every so often depending on your performance or the level you're on or whatever the case may be. In any event, it just keeps you on your toes at all times and never really gives you ample opportunity to be complacent during your gameplay. And while there are instances where it might feel a bit overwhelming at times, especially when the well is almost full and you have little room to set a clear path for the ghosts, it very rarely feels overly frustrating. The puzzle mode has its share of tricky scenarios, and the solution might not be cut and dry at first, but they can eventually be solved, and it feels genuinely gratifying when you eventually find the solution. Pac-Attack looks like a puzzle game. I don't know how much more you want me to say in that regard, but the general layout is visually adequate, it's not loud or obtrusive, and it's a fine looking game for what little it does. The playfield is well presented with a backdrop that doesn't distract from the foreground action. Pac-Man and ghosts look like Pac-Man and ghosts. The block of stuffs are simple looking, all the stats and stuff is legible. The important thing is you can see what's going on when Pac-Attacking, and that's clearly the case here. A nice detail is that each mode has different colors and a different image in the background, and I like this graffiti style menu with the neon lights. It gives the game a bit of character, for lack of a better term. Sound wise, it's also alright. There's a handful of tunes only, but there are fairly catchy melodies with some familiar Pac jingles mixed in for good measure. Even some of the sound effects are essentially recreations of classic Pac sounds. Other than those notes, sound in Pac-Attack is just fine. No real sticking points to praise or complain about, it's just there and that's perfectly fine. Overall, Pac-Attack is a basic and straightforward puzzle game that manages to combine elements of traditional Pac-Man with that of a typical Tetris-style puzzle game to create a really enjoyable and challenging little game. It's easy to get into, difficult to master, but ultimately a good little time killer and a rather decent title that holds its own against some of the more notable puzzle games out there. Nowadays, Pac-Attack can be found on a number of more recent Namco compilations such as the Pac-Man Museum from a couple years ago, and it's also available on a number of video game formats. Pac-Attack on the Genesis plays well enough, it follows the formula just fine, but there's nothing to it that makes it a must-have unless you're looking to add to that Pac-Man or Mega Drive collection, or just have to have every version of this particular title for whatever reason. Still, if you want a decent puzzler on the Genesis that isn't Columns or Puyo Puyo, then Pac-Attack should suffice rather nicely. Who knows, you might even take a liking to it.